The millstone turns, but the hopper is empty. It is a terrible, hollow sound, stone grinding blindly upon stone, a violent rasp shrieking into the ribbed rafters of the granary. It is the low, mechanical moan that precedes the hunger. Outside, the November frost has already sunk its teeth deep into the rotting thatch of Aethelstan. The valley is no longer a kingdom of men. It is a frozen sea of vast, silent gray, and this solitary village is nothing but a fragile island of huddled, desperate warmth. The harvest has failed, the grain is gone, and winter has only just begun to tighten its grip. In the high, bright courts of lords and kings, survival is a matter measured in silver and steel. But here, where the north wind steals the very breath from your lungs, a coin is just cold, useless metal. The people of Aethelstan do not look to the sky for salvation. The heavens are closed to them, pale and indifferent. Instead, they look down. They look to the earth, to the dark, fibrous tubers dragged up from the freezing, unyielding mud. They are the children of the turnip, an ugly, bruised root born of darkness. It yields a bitter harvest that tastes of damp soil, of iron, and of desperate, bleeding endurance. Inside the dim, smoke-choked hovels, the old women sit as silent sentinels beside the glowing hearths. Their hands, mapped with ancient veins and stained pitch black with frost and soil, move with a rhythmic, heavy grace. With dull iron knives, they peel away the tough, scabbed skin of the roots to reveal the pale, ghost-white flesh beneath. The scent of wet earth and sharp wood smoke fills the cramped air. It is a dark sacrament of survival, a quiet communion of absolute necessity. Every slice of the blade is a whispered prayer to see tomorrow. Every boiling pot is an act of defiance against a season that wants them dead. Yet as the days shorten into fleeting, gray hours, the silence of the valley grows heavier. It presses against the wattle and daub walls, feeling less like peace and more like a slow strangulation. The bitter roots will keep the heart beating, but they cannot chase away the shadows creeping at the edge of the tree line. As the freeze deepens, a terrifying realization settles into the ashes of every hearth. The earth itself is turning to stone. Soon, the mud will lock its meager harvest away beneath an impenetrable shell of ice. And when the soil refuses to yield, what will the village turn to then? The wind does not just blow, it hunts. It carries the sharp, acrid scent of burning peat and something deeper, a metallic tang, like blood mixed with rusted iron, clinging to the back of the throat. It is the scent of a harvest that has turned to rot. Where there should be the rhythmic shushing of the scythe and the golden abundance of late summer, there is only a sickening, heavy silence. The rye has failed. The stalks, once proud and swaying, stand blackened and broken, strangled by a creeping blight that smells of wet ash and ancient, forgotten graves. At the edge of this landscape of despair, the village elders stand like hollowed-out monuments of bone and wool. Their breath rises in thick silver plumes, ghost-like against the bruised purple of a damp dusk. They do not speak. They only watch. Below them, the children crawl through the mud, their small hands blue with cold, scavenging for the few unblemished ears of grain that the rot might have spared. They look for silver in a field of charcoal. The vast tapestry of gold that usually feeds the valley has been unraveled, leaving behind a jagged, freezing void. But beneath the shadow of the blighted rye, nestled in the iron-hard earth, the resilient cabbage survives. It is a coarse, unyielding thing, leaves thick and ribbed like the armor of a forgotten soldier, tasting of sulfur and a strange, bitter stubbornness. It is not a feast. It is a stay of execution. In the dim, smoke-choked hovels, the villagers strip the outer husks, boiling the leaves until they soften into a watery, thin gruel. It is a meal that barely coats the ribs, yet it is the only wall standing between the village and the long terminal sleep of the starving year. Inside these cramped spaces, the steam from the boiling pots rises in thin, swirling ribbons, mingling with the heavy wood smoke of the hearth. These vapors are more than just heat. They are desperate, silent prayers drifting toward a heaven that seems to have turned its back. The cabbage is the last line of defense, a bitter anchor to the world of the living. But as the fire flickers low and the shadows on the timber walls grow long, a new fear begins to stir in the silence. For even the most stubborn root cannot sustain the spirit when the forest itself begins to whisper of things darker than hunger. The silence of the deep forest is no longer a sanctuary. It is a weight, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, sharp crack of an axe biting into dead wood. At the village edge, a jagged boundary exists, a thin line of frost and shadow between the familiar agony of the hearth and the predatory indifference of the unknown wild. For generations, the great oaks were a source of terror, home to spirits and wolves. Now, they are the only thing left. The village has turned to the acorns, a bitter, jagged harvest traditionally abandoned to the swine. To eat of it is to admit that the world of men has finally failed. Near the banks of the icy stream, the women gather in a grim, silent sisterhood. Their hands are raw, mapped with blue veins and numb to a deathly white as they submerge the nuts into the freezing current. And they watch as the water runs a dark, muddy brown, slowly leaching away the poisonous tannins that would otherwise ease the throat. This is a slow, laborious alchemy of the desperate, a transformation of the inedible into a coarse, gritty flour. There is no scent of warm wheat here, only the cold, sharp smell of wet bark and tannin. It is a labor born of love, but executed with the mechanical coldness of those who have already looked into the eyes of death. In the dying embers of the communal fire, they bake this flour into hard, dense cakes. These are not loaves of life, they are stones of endurance. They sit heavy and unyielding in the stomach, creating a dull, throbbing ache that mimics a cruel version of fullness. The children sit in the shadows, their eyes wide and hollow, lit only by the flickering orange light. They chew on the scorched edges with a slow, hypnotic persistence, tasting the gritty, desperate boundary of their own survival. The forest, once the kingdom of nightmare, has become their meager larder. The ancient oaks stand as silent, reluctant benefactors, offering their bitter fruit to a people who have run out of prayers. But as the last of the acorns are gathered and the wood smoke drifts thin against the canopy, a new shadow begins to stretch across the snow. For while the trees have given what they can, the village storehouse remains a hollow ribcage of timber, and the most brutal months of the winter are yet to speak their name. The frost is thick upon the window skins, tracing delicate, fern-like patterns of ice that seem to mock the barren, frozen fields lying dead outside the timber walls. Within the village of Aethelstan, the very air feels brittle, as if it might shatter under the weight of a single heavy word. All that remains of the autumn sweat is locked behind the heavy oak door of the storehouse. There, a large iron key rests against the chest of the village headman, hanging from a fraying cord, a cold, unyielding weight that serves as the only heartbeat of the community. It is the gatekeeper of their survival, and it is a heavy burden for a man of clay to carry. Inside, the dark, drafty hull of the barn, the last of the parsnips are hoarded like a king's ransom. They are pale and wrinkled, and their skins as shriveled as the calloused hands that pulled them from the autumn mire. These roots are no longer mere food. They are a slow hemorrhage of hope. Each day, the headman doles them out in meager rations, a systematic rationing of life itself. The village gathers in the great hall, a space built for feasting that has now become a sanctuary of shared sorrow. The air is thick, stagnant with the smell of unwashed wool, damp smoke, and the sharp metallic tang of anxious breath. As the parsnips are pushed into the dying embers of the central hearth, a sweet, earthy scent begins to rise, a cruel, spectral reminder of better days when the sun stayed late and the belly was full. They eat in a silence so profound it feels sacred. The only sound is the rhythmic scraping of wooden spoons against wooden bowls, a percussive symphony of scarcity. Every bite is a calculated victory. Every swallow is a defiance of the encroaching dark that howls just beyond the eaves. They are a people bound together by a shared endurance, eyes reflecting the orange flicker of a fire that grows smaller with every passing moon. The headman watches from the shadows, his face a mask of weathered stone, his fingers tracing the cold iron of the key. He sees the hollows deepening in the cheeks of the children and the trembling of the elders' hands. He knows the grim truth that the ledgers of nature do not lie. The real test, the deep skeletal winter of the spirit, is still months away. And as the last of the embers fade to gray ash, a new sound begins to rise from the river, a low, grinding groan of ice that signals a different kind of hunger is coming to claim the valley. The river is sluggish now, a black ribbon of glass choked with jagged ice and the rotting debris of a dying year. It moves with a heavy, reluctant gait, as if the water itself has grown tired of flowing through such a desolate land. Along its muddy banks, the men of the village pull at woven willow traps, their fingers blue and trembling. They seek the eel, slippery, dark shadows that once promised a rich, oily fat to stave off the biting cold. But today, the willow cages emerge from the depths empty, dripping with nothing but freezing silt. The waters have become as stingy and unyielding as the iron-hard earth, with the grain pits long since depleted and the river refusing its bounty. The village turns its eyes toward the neglected corners of the settlement, to the places where only the unwanted thrive. They turn to the stinging nettle. It is a plant of shadow and spite, a weed that flourishes in the damp muck behind the hovels. The women gather them now, their movements slow and deliberate. They reach into the thickets with careful, calloused hands, the sharp, stinging needles of the leaves, a small price to pay for the promise of anything that resembles sustenance. Each prick of the skin is a reminder that they are still alive, still capable of feeling the bite of the world. Back at the hearth, these jagged leaves are boiled down into a dark, bitter broth. It is not a meal of celebration, but a soup of defiance. It tastes of iron and damp earth, a harsh, metallic reminder of their precarious existence on the edge of the void. Yet, as the villagers gather in the dim light, they drink it hot, letting the searing liquid warm their freezing bodies from the inside out. It is a meager fire kindled against a creeping chill that has already claimed the fields and the forest. The nettle, once a mere symbol of neglect and poverty, has been transformed into a strange kind of salvation, a testament to a stubborn, jagged will to endure when all the gentler things of the earth have vanished. They sit in the flickering orange glow, a people sustained by the very weeds they once trampled. But even as the warmth of the broth settles in their blood, A new sound begins to drift through the timber walls, the relentless, soft hiss of the sky beginning to fall, a white silence that threatens to bury their defiance beneath a blanket of absolute cold. The snow falls with a relentless, soft hiss, a sound like the earth drawing its final, freezing breath. It is a suffocating blanket, a white shroud that buries the narrow lanes and thatched eaves of Aethelstan in a terrifying, absolute silence. Within the grain pits, the wood-lined depths offer no comfort. The last of the oats have been scraped from the floor, leaving nothing but a fine, gray dust and the cold, metallic smell of old stone. The storehouse is no longer a temple of abundance, but a hollow ribcage, and outside, the world has vanished into a blinding, featureless void. Now, survival is found only in the dark, lightless corners of the root cellars. Here, tucked away like buried treasure, sits the humble onion. It is a sharp, pungent thing, its papery skin rattling in the draft like a dying man's whisper. Now, this is their meager defense against the twin predators of the cold and the hunger. It is not the noble wheat or the Lord's venison, but it is enough to keep the spirit tethered to the bone. They do not cook them with the luxury of fats or salts. They simply thrust them whole into the glowing orange heart of the hearth's ashes. As the heat takes hold, the charred layers peel back, weeping a stinging juice that burns the tongue and waters the eyes. It is a flavor of sharp necessity, a piercing, acidic heat that cuts through the dull, throbbing ache of a stomach that has forgotten the weight of bread. In this cramped, smoke-filled sanctuary, the village huddles together, skin pressed to skin. They share the dying heat of a single hearth and the sharp, shared bite of the roasted roots, finding a desperate solidarity in their common suffering. The sharp scent of the onion fills the room, an earthy, defiant aroma that mocks the sterile scent of the snow outside. But even this pungency cannot entirely mask the sound of the timber walls groaning under the weight of the drifts. For while the onion provides a momentary warmth, the eyes of the elders remain fixed on the frost patterns on the door. They know that as the blizzard thickens, the very trees they rely on for warmth are beginning to crack under the iron grip of the frost. And when the wood runs dry, the village will have to face a cruelty that even the earthiest root cannot soften. The first thaw is not a celebration. It is a cruel, weeping illusion. As the white shroud of winter finally retreats, it leaves behind a world of treacherous, visceral mud, a thick, black slurry that clings to the boots of the survivors like the heavy memory of the long winter they have just endured. The air is damp, smelling of ancient frost and thawing rot. There is a frantic hope in the chest of every villager, but the horizon offers no mercy. The grain pits are empty stone. The root cellars are nothing but hollow shadows. The new green shoots of spring are still weeks away, locked beneath the freezing mire, and the hungry gap has finally arrived to claim its due. In this desperate interlude between the end of the old world and the birth of the new, the people of Aethelstan turn their eyes toward the sky, but not for prayer. Yet they look to the elm trees. With knives dulled by months of hard use, they begin a final frantic harvest, stripping the pale inner bark from the living timber. It is a slow, agonizing theft from the forest itself. The bark is dried by the fading hearths and pounded into a fine, scentless dust, a ghost of flour. Mixed with the last bitter dregs of acorn meal or dried nettles, it is baked into what the elders call the bread of sorrow. This bread is a grim miracle of physics. It is a tough, fibrous mass that requires more energy to chew than its meager nutrients can ever provide. It is the food of the nearly departed. In the dim light of the village square, They sit upon the stones and eat with a heavy, ritualistic solemnity. There is no laughter, no relief, only a silent, now collective acknowledgement of the terrifying fragility of their lives. Each swallow is a struggle, a physical labor that marks the lines of a battle fought and, for this hour, barely won. They have survived on roots, on weeds, and now on the very skin of the trees. Their faces are etched with the deep furrows of the starving years, masks of bone and leather that tell a story of impossible endurance. As the sun sets on this final act of survival, a single bird calls out from the clearing, a herald of the spring that was bought, with the blood and spirit of a village that refused to vanish. But as the mud begins to dry, a new question rises with the mist. Once the hunger is fed, how do a people return from the edge of such a dark and hollow world?